fossil fuel companies, whose carbon emissions from oil, coal, and gas, study after study has shown, are major contributors to climate change. Charleston is one of more than 24 cities, counties, and states that are suing these companies, including ExxonMobil, Shell, Chevron, BP, and ConocoPhillips.
How did these oil companies manage to fool us for so long and delay the fight against climate change? To understand how a handful of companies were allowed to cause so much devastation around the world, we must first dig into the past. In the late 1920s, the excess speculation by the banks led the collapse of the economy. Millions of people lost their savings, thousands of banks and businesses closed, and millions of workers found themselves without a job. In the 1930s, poverty had become rampant in America. But for some car makers, selling cheap cars brought big profits. As America began to emerge from the Great Depression, cities across the country saw a huge increase in traffic, and the city of Los Angeles experienced a strange new phenomenon, a form of air pollution created from smoke and looking like fog. They called it smog. This new kind of air pollution was caused by car exhaust. To bring this pollution under control, California Governor Earl Warren signed the Air Pollution Control Act in 1947. But to the oil companies, this was an attack on their business. As a response, they created the Smoke and Fumes Committee to blur the science of air pollution and delay action on a range of measures. In the 1950s, the Humble Oil Company, which became ExxonMobil, conducted an internal study about the impact of burning fossil fuels on the environment. The study, called the Brannan Report, confirmed what all previous scientific studies had concluded. Burning fossil fuels was contributing to the rising levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and causing the Earth's temperature to rise. But this was not what Humble Oil wanted to hear, and the company quickly buried their own report. In 1950, the level of carbon dioxide measured in the Earth's atmosphere had risen above 300 parts per million, higher than the highest level the Earth had seen in 800,000 years, when humans hadn't yet started walking the Earth. In 1968, Elmer Robinson, who led the Stanford Research Institute, conducted a study financed by oil companies through the American Petroleum Institute. In his report, Robinson warned that if carbon dioxide levels continued to rise at the present rate, there would be no doubt that the potential damage to our environment could be severe, and the prospect for the future must be of serious concern. This shows that the fossil fuel industry was aware that the increase of carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere would cause the climate to change and bring disaster around the world. But while publicly denying the reality of climate change, the oil companies began taking measures to adapt to the effects of global warming. They used their inside knowledge to adjust the designs of oil rigs in anticipation of rising sea levels, explore the Arctic to find a faster shipping route when the ice melts, design better ground anchors for the Trans-Alaska Pipeline against the melting of permafrost, build their Alaska oil rigs for thinner ice sheets, reinforce and elevate oil platforms to withstand stronger storms and anticipate rising sea levels, and strengthen gas pipelines vulnerable to floods. By 1970, the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere had climbed to 326.
This is NBC Nightly News, Wednesday, October 17th. Reported by John Chancellor.
Good evening. The Middle East war produced developments all over the world today. The oil-producing countries of the Arab world decided to use their oil as a political weapon. They will reduce oil production by 5% a month until the Israelis withdraw from occupied territories.
The year was 1973, and the oil-producing countries had formed the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC. The embargo on oil shipment OPEC imposed against the United States was in retaliation for the U.S. military support of Israel in the Yom Kippur War. Oil companies began considering solutions to solve the problem of dependence on imported oil and the inevitable transition from fossil fuel to renewable energy. Exxon, the largest oil company in the world, began research on solar energy, electric cars, and lithium batteries. In the late 70s, Exxon got together a team of their best scientists to study the consequences of global warming. The study came to the same conclusion as other researchers in academia. The average temperature of the Earth was going to warm significantly. Ice was going to melt and sea level to rise. There would be a reduction in rainfall rate. Alterations in the biosphere would occur, along with other potentially catastrophic events. In 1980, the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere had climbed to 339. Exxon, the authority in the science of climate change, was now in a position to become the world leader in alternative energies. But with the arrival of Lee Raymond at the head of the company, Exxon decided to abandon its research on renewable energy, and Lee Raymond became the loudest voice in climate change denial, contradicting his company's own findings.
There is a natural variability that has nothing to do with man. The climate has changed every year for millions of years. And the reality is, the science isn't there to make that determination. There have been times in the Earth's history where there has been no ice on the Earth.
To cut the use of fossil fuels based on the unproved theory that they affect the Earth's climate. There is no convincing scientific evidence that human release of carbon dioxide, methane, or other greenhouse gases is causing or will, in the foreseeable future, cause catastrophic heating of the Earth's atmosphere and disruption of the Earth's climate. There is a substantial difference of view in the scientific community as to what exactly is going on. I could assert to you that I don't think this is happening. Is our close cooperation with the automobile industry. If we all work toward the same goal, I believe we can change the perceptions of the American people about energy.
What Lee Raymond was urging was closer cooperation between the fossil fuel and the automobile industries to change the perception of the American people about global warming. To achieve this, the fossil fuel industry used front groups like Global Climate Coalition and Information Council for the Environment. They spent millions of dollars on ad campaigns to emphasize scientific uncertainties and create doubt about climate change. They spent millions more to influence Washington politicians and prevent Congress from passing climate legislation and signing international treaties. In 1989, the EPA issued a report to Congress about the threat of climate change. With the rising of sea level, wetland will flood, and saltwater will infuse freshwater supplies and contaminate soils. Coastal communities will have to combat the increase of salinity in surface water. Urbanized coastal areas will have to invest billions of dollars in the development of protections against rising sea levels. Species extinction will increase. Some forested land will become grassland. Agriculture yields will be reduced. Shifts in rainfall patterns will increase the frequencies of extreme droughts and floods. The report reached public awareness with a sense of urgency, and a battle began between government agencies and the oil industry. The American Petroleum Institute, the chief lobby organization for the oil companies, hired economist David Montgomery to prepare a report about the effect of climate change on the economy. Montgomery's report claimed, with scant evidence, that the costs of climate policy would be high and economic benefits uncertain and potentially small. Disguised as an independent study, the paper was published and broadcast nationwide through the Associated Press, CNN, USA Today, and other media and industry publications. In 1990, the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere reached 354.
Koch Industries has been called the biggest company you never heard of.
In 1993, the Koch Industries was one of the largest private oil and gas companies in the world, and the worst producer of toxic waste in America. The company was run by brothers Charles and David Koch.
Our plan does include a broad-based tax on energy, and it is environmentally responsible. It will help us in the future as well as in the present with the deficit.
When the Clinton administration proposed a carbon tax on the fossil fuel industry, the Koch brothers embarked on a campaign to kill the carbon tax bill. With their enormous wealth, the brothers funded the Cato Institute to blur the scientific findings on climate change.
This coalition is one of the fastest growing and strongest that I've seen. We will stop the BTU tax.
They also created Citizens for Sound Economy to finance their strategic anti-carbon tax campaign, and zeroed in on Senator David Boren, the Democratic chair in charge of revising the Clinton budget. The Koch brothers and their Citizens for Sound Economy launched a campaign of harassment against Senator Boren to force him to take the carbon tax out of the Clinton budget.
That is the BTU tax, which is the tax which is a part of the administration's plan that does hit lower and middle income Americans.
After the defeat of the carbon tax, the Koch brothers used the same playbook to defeat any policy they deemed unfriendly to their business and pushed their efforts to cast doubt about global warming, even though massive amounts of alarming data was coming out from government agencies like NOAA and NASA. The Koch brothers and their allies reacted by creating more front groups to hire pseudoscientists and denial specialists to contradict scientific findings about climate change.
And we looked at the temperature pattern from those cities over this century. We found out that most of the United States has cooled this century, not warmed.
Over the entire 10-year period of time, there was no net warming or cooling.
If you started it someplace else, if you ended it at someplace else, the trend changes. Last 50 years, it does nothing.
Over the past 100, 150 years or so, and you find that there has been no significant warming.
There's no evidence that sea level rise has accelerated due to global warming.
In 1995, as the Earth temperature kept rising, ice melting, and sea level rising, 500 scientists from around the world met in Madrid, Spain. All agreed in a published report that burning fossil fuel was causing the world temperature to rise and bringing with it environmental disaster. The fossil fuel industry, using their front group Global Climate Coalition, retaliated by hiring Frederick Seitz, a former consultant for the tobacco industry, in their campaign of disinformation about cigarette smoking. Seitz wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal to discredit the Madrid report as biased and deceptive, and accused the authors of the report of fraud and corruption. The effect of carbon dioxide on the temperature of the air has been known since 1856, when an American scientist named Eunice Foote documented the power of carbon dioxide to absorb heat and act as a greenhouse gas. She warned that carbon dioxide gas would give to our Earth a higher temperature. More than a century later, by drilling for ice cores in the ice sheets of Antarctica, scientists have been able to analyze the air bubbles trapped in the ice for amounts of carbon dioxide, going back 800,000 years. They also studied ocean sediments from the sea floor to develop a timeline of the Earth temperature variations going back millions of years. Using the same time frame of 800,000 years, scientists have confirmed what Eunice Foote had predicted in 1856. The level of carbon dioxide in the Earth atmosphere has a direct impact on the Earth's temperature. In 1998, the fossil fuel industry hatched a wide and concerted effort with special interest groups and right-wing libertarians to attack climate science and increase political pressure. They targeted average citizens, the media, the industry's senior leadership, members of Congress supporting international treaties, school teachers and students, and science writers. It became the oil industry's playbook on how to create an atmosphere of doubt about global warming and convince policymakers against taking action. In 2000, the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere had climbed to 372.
Welcome to this second Election 2000 debate between the Republican candidate for president, Governor George W. Bush of Texas, and the Democratic candidate, Vice President Al Gore.
Vice President Al Gore, who had long advocated action to combat global warming, had brought the United States to join 192 other countries to sign the Kyoto Protocol to limit carbon emissions.
What about global warming?
I think it's an issue that we need to take very seriously, but I don't think we know the solution to global warming yet, and I don't think we've got all the facts before we make decisions.
But I disagree that we don't know the cause of global warming. I think that we do. It's pollution. Carbon dioxide and other chemicals that are even more potent, but in smaller quantities, that cause this. Look, the World's temperature is going up, weather patterns are changing, storms are getting more violent and unpredictable.
George Bush, an oil man from Texas, ended up winning the presidency in 2000, in spite of losing the popular vote.
Global warming needs to be taken very seriously, and I take it seriously.
While pretending to take global warming seriously during his presidential debate, President Bush pulled the United States from the Kyoto Protocol, making false claims about the impact of the protocol on the economy and unemployment.
The approach taken under the Kyoto Protocol would have cost our economy up to $400 billion, and we would have lost 4.9 million jobs. Today, I call for new Clean Skies legislation that sets tough new standards to dramatically reduce the three most significant forms of pollution.
The Clear Skies Initiative was never implemented. Instead, President Bush passed an energy policy to increase the production of oil. It was a victory for the oil companies, who wasted no time pressuring the Bush administration to alter the findings of scientists leading the scientific community and silence or remove those working for the government who didn't fall in line with the industry's propaganda. America had once again missed a chance to become the world leader in the fight against global warming. By the end of the decade, oil companies had consolidated into 6 powerful companies. At the same time, it had become apparent to everyone that climate science was real, and ExxonMobil had no choice but to take a public position supporting climate action.
The risk posed by rising greenhouse gas emissions could prove to be significant.
But new chairman Rex Tillerson made it clear that Exxon was ready to fight any regulation.
Our shared goal is to reduce emissions at the lowest cost to society, not become bogged down in bureaucratic demands or incur the cost of financially burdensome regulatory systems.
As for the Koch brothers, they used their massive wealth to deploy their political machine. They funded Americans for Prosperity to pressure Republican candidates who had benefited from big oil money to sign a pledge to oppose any climate change legislation. They went on to purge the Republican Party of lawmakers who didn't openly challenge climate science. The Koch brothers had successfully reshaped the Republican Party to become their ally. In 2010, the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere had climbed to 390.
And yes, my plan will continue to reduce the carbon pollution that is heating our planet, because climate change is not a hoax. More droughts and floods and wildfires are not a joke. They are a threat to our children's future, and in this election, you can do something about it.
With President Barack Obama in the White House, his administration began a major climate push that would lead to the historic Paris Accord in 2015.
A record number of countries signed the historic Paris Accord to slow global warming. China and the United States, the world's top producers of greenhouse gas emissions, pledged to formally adopt the deal by the end of the year. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry brought his granddaughter along, symbolically stressing the pact's importance for future generations.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. President Obama is proposing the toughest regulations in U.S. history to combat climate change. In a video previewing tomorrow's announcement, the president says climate change is not an opinion, but a fact and a threat. He calls power plants the biggest domestic source of polluting emissions that contribute to global warming.
The gas and coal industries, along with Republicans across the country, mounted a massive attack against the Obama plan and sued the president for his executive order about climate regulations.
This isn't about me suing the president. What we're talking about here are places where the president is basically rewriting law to make it fit his own needs.
Really? Really? For what? You're going to sue me for doing my job? I've got a better idea. Do something.
The oil and gas companies and their front groups also conducted a massive campaign of misinformation about renewable energy.
And placing that right in Florida's Constitution keeps politicians and special interests from tampering with it.
All right, let's talk about special interests. This ad is paid for by a group called Consumers for Smart Solar, but there's nothing consumer about it. I followed the money trail, digging into their financial records, and I found out that big power companies like Duke Energy, Florida Power and Light, and TECO have been dumping millions of dollars into this pro-Amendment 1 campaign.
With the arrival of Donald Trump in the White House, the Koch brothers tightened their grip on the American political and judicial systems by populating the Trump administration and the courts with people loyal to their interests. Senior-level officials, cabinet secretaries, federal agencies heads, and Supreme Court justices. President Trump rolled back over 100 rules and regulations to favor the oil industry and created new rules to benefit them. He also pulled out of the Paris Accord.
The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord
And embarked on a relentless campaign of lies and absurdities.
Every single one of the signatories to the Paris Climate Accord lags behind America in overall emissions reductions. Who would think that is possible?
And we have ended the war on beautiful, clean coal.
But we love clean, beautiful West Virginia coal. We love it. Right. We have the best, lowest number in carbon emissions. If you have a windmill anywhere near your house, congratulations. Your house just went down 75% in value. And they say the noise causes cancer. You told me that one, okay? You know, the thing makes it so... And of course, it's like a graveyard for birds. We're doing it right. And you know, our numbers environmentally right now are better than they've ever been before, just so you know. Because I'm an environmentalist, I am.
New data from NASA and NOAA shows that 2018 was the fourth hottest year since scientists began keeping records in 1880. The last 5 years make up the top 5 hottest years ever, with 2016 at number 1. The data shows global temperatures have risen about 8 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Fahrenheit over the last 139 years, and there are no signs it's slowing down. Scientists are attributing the rise of global climate temperatures to human activity, in particular, the burning of fossil fuels.
In 2020, the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere passed the 400 mark to reach 413, a 38% increase since 1950. In spite of years of record profits, the fossil fuel industry still receives billions of dollars every year in federal and state subsidies. During the 2020 pandemic, as millions of small businesses closed their doors, the fossil fuel companies received $5.9 trillion in subsidies.
CNN projects Joseph R. Biden Jr. is elected the 46th president of the United States, winning the White House and denying President Trump a second term.
Rejoining the Paris Accords is one step in President Joe Biden's strategy to fight global warming. Biden plans to spend $1.7 trillion on rapidly deploying clean energy.
This was bad news for big oil. Using the U.S. Chamber of Commerce as their powerful lobby organization, they brought their fight to the courts and spent hundreds of millions of dollars lobbying Republicans and vulnerable Democrats to block climate change policies.
Democrats on Capitol Hill wanted clear testimony from oil executives of ExxonMobil, Chevron, BP America, and Shell.
ExxonMobil has long recognized that climate change is real and poses serious risks.
While publicly denying their role in climate change disinformation and pretending to care about global warming, the oil companies are fighting harder than ever, using the Chamber of Commerce to prevent Congress from passing any climate bill and kill the very things they say publicly they support. Among the big oil CEOs testifying before the House Oversight Committee was Suzanne Clark, the Chamber of Commerce CEO. She had been requested to explain the role of the Chamber of Commerce in their long-running, industry-wide campaign to spread disinformation about the role of fossil fuels in causing global warming, which has been devastating American communities, costing taxpayers billions of dollars, and ravaging the natural world.
The Chamber's position is clear. The climate is changing, and humans are contributing to these changes. We believe Congress must enact durable climate policy with bipartisan support.
Well, one of the worst expositors of that political influence, the monster in the middle of that political influence campaign here in the United States, is the United States Chamber of Commerce. I'll tell you what the Chamber did. Over the past 2 decades, every time Congress took up good climate bills, the Chamber conspired to kill them. The reason is pretty simple. The Chamber serves as the arm of the fossil fuel industry. It takes its money and it does its dirty work. The Chamber's axis of influence in Congress has refused to hold hearings on, mark up, debate, or vote on any serious climate legislation.
It's no wonder that the United States' efforts toward climate change has received poor ratings, thanks to the Chamber of Commerce and the Republicans in Congress, who have been fighting every climate policy and public funding to combat global warming.
Is it correct that the satellite data over the last 18 years demonstrate no significant warming?
So do I think that man has impacted climate change? The jury is still out on that.
I don't know that it's man-made.
I do not believe that human activity is causing these dramatic changes to our climate.
Just the way the Earth rotates on its axis, how far away it is from the sun. These are all very complex things.
The sun goes in, it gets cool. You notice that, right? You have an eclipse, the temperature drops, the seasonal changes with the sun. How you can suggest that the sun is not a factor is
climate change is not science, it's religion.
The earth will end only when God declares it's time to be over.
Most experts believe by 2083, in 70 years, the benefits of climate change will still outweigh the harm.
The real threat to human civilization is not global warming. It never was global warming. The real threat to people is global cooling.
People are telling us this is the worst they've ever seen. The fires have burned more intensely, more ferociously. They seem to have a mind of their own.
Satellite imagery is showing that Arctic sea ice is at its lowest levels on record.
In northern Siberia, it hit 100.4 degrees.
We are looking right now at the all-time record heat for the month of June.
A catastrophic Category 4 hurricane bearing down in the U.S.
We could be looking at a majority of the surrounding communities flooded with upwards of 9 to 20 feet of water.
The 2 largest wildfires in Colorado history are burning dangerously close.
With Congress paralyzed by dark money from big oil and other special interests, changes can only come from us, the people. So please, share what you've learned from this video and be active at the ballot box and through civil action. Support, organize, and participate in peaceful protests. Take a stand. It only takes a spark to start a movement.